Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated and provide us with a statement.
Good morning, Senator Duff, in absentia, Representative Jankowski, members of the Executive and Legislative Nominations Committee. It's a genuine pleasure to appear before you today, having been re-nominated by Governor Malloy to be the Commissioner of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. I'm honored to be considered, humbled by the confidence that the Governor and others have placed in me, and very excited by the opportunities that lie ahead to contribute to public safety and public service in Connecticut. I want to thank you for the opportunity to touch upon the work I've undertaken during my first year as Commissioner in Connecticut and the next round of initiatives I am pursuing at DESP, as well as prior appointments, related professional activities, and my academic record. I was in high school when I chose public safety and service as my path, and I've been fortunate. Over time, I have led 3 state systems, including Connecticut, 2 city agencies, and 1 federal office. Just prior to joining the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection as Commissioner in January 2014, I served in the Bloomberg administration as the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Correction, an agency with 10,000 employees, 80,000 admissions annually, and an operating budget of $1.1 billion. During my tenure in New York City, I developed and put into place innovative programs for adolescents, the mentally ill, and inmates ready for release, advanced intake classification and discharge planning, undertook reform of punitive segregation, and increased staff accountability. During my tenure at DOC, the DOC was the first in the nation to put into place social impact bond funding. We used it to advance reforms for young adults in custody. We led the identification and the implementation of citywide court-based diversion opportunities for mentally ill inmates and undertook comprehensive reform of punitive segregation. Before returning to New York City, I was special advisor to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano and the founding director of the Office of Detention Policy and Planning within Immigration and Customs Enforcement. During my tenure at DHS, I authored a report on the preliminary assessment of ICE detention policies and practices. It was the recommended course of action for systems reform. DHS adopted the report as its template for improving the United States immigration detention system. I have also led both the Missouri and Arizona Department of Corrections from 1993 through 2001 and from 2003 through 2009, respectively. During these 10 years, the departments were recognized 5 times by the Innovations in American Government Program, 3 times by the Council of State Governments Innovations Program, including winner of the Innovations in American Government Award in 2008, an innovation that lowered recidivism 28% and bid day utilization by $5.6 million, and also raised $1.4 million for crime victims. In each of these states, Missouri, Arizona, and Connecticut, I'm also the first and only woman to have led these agencies. I was also warden and later commissioner of the St. Louis City Division of Corrections. As detailed in my resume, I've been recognized by my peers as the country's top corrections administrator by the National Governors Association for Distinguished Service for innovations in systems reforms in Arizona and Missouri, and for exceptional service to crime victims by the U.S. Department of Justice. Today, I'm proud to serve as a commissioner on the boards of the Women's Refugee Commission and the American Bar Association Commission on Immigration, and as a member of the ABA Immigration Standards Subcommittee. And whenever I can, I delight in tending my garden, cooking for a crowd, and restoring my 1965 wooden speedboat. I'm not a stranger to New England. I'm a graduate of Northeastern University, where I earned a BA cum laude, and the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I entered the workforce there as well. I returned to New York City to attend Columbia University, where I earned a doctorate in 1984, and then later, living in Missouri, I attended law school and received a Juris Doctorate from St. Louis University in 2002. Embedded in my work are these themes: always a willingness to reach out to others, to listen and to learn, a lifelong commitment to excellence and innovation through public service and public safety, a solid grounding in the paramilitary culture, and unconditional regard for the contributions made by both uniform and civilian personnel, and a genuine respect for every colleague and coworker, including, of course, crime victims and survivors, community partners and stakeholders, and organized labor. My first year as the Commissioner of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection has been both challenging and rewarding. My overall focus was to assess and strengthen our impact on public safety, public service, and victim advocacy, and our overall response and recovery after untoward events. And those events in the last 12 months afforded me ample opportunity to practice. There were threats of domestic terrorism, Ebola, hurricanes, earthquakes, and major snowstorms. Among our key accomplishments, DEF's 6 recently consolidated agencies are now fully integrated. All of the troops are open 24/7. A study of overtime spending was completed and a system of oversight put into place. Initiatives were launched. Among them, troopers were trained to dispense naloxone and to administer the lethality risk assessment instrument. School safety was advanced with the rollout of the School Security Infrastructure Grant Program and the piloting of Next Generation School Safety Officer Program, and by enhancing the safety and well-being of first responders and the communities they serve by developing an Ebola protocols for first responders, an earthquake preparedness checklist for at-risk communities, and enhanced emergency communication strategies for populations whose primary language is other than English. And we've just begun. Through 2015 and continuing to 2016, we are fortifying our responses to domestic violence and substance abuse, improving our interactions with persons with mental illness, and focusing on human trafficking and underage prostitution, cybercrime, and cyberterrorism. I want to thank you kindly for your interest, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Congratulations on your nomination. This is a reappointment. You've been serving, I believe, for 4 years.
Yeah. No, ma'am, I've been here for a year.
How long have you been serving?
For just a little over a year.
Oh, you have.
Yeah.
You were here. You were before the committee, though. Once
last
before.
January.
To finish the
first term.
The term of your predecessor.
Correct.
Okay. I know you were here because I remember asking you questions. Couple of questions. One has to do with the dispatch consolidation. I know this was a problem, particularly to a number of legislators in the eastern part of the state, and I know that it came up for discussion last year, and you were kind enough when you became commissioner to re-review the dispatch consolidation. Where are we with that now, and what is happening? I believe that the decision was that it wouldn't happen, but I'm not sure.
Well, thank you for the question. In my first month, I traveled the state. I toured all of the 11 troops, spoke with rank and file and members of leadership, and looked at a considerable amount of data. Within the next several months, I made the determination that all the troops needed to be reopened on a 24/7 basis, and we were able to do so without returning any troopers off the road in order to accomplish that important task. We also looked for ways we parsed out the number of calls that were 911 calls from those that are administrative calls, and it was really the administrative calls that caused so much concern because they were very much local issues. And so since the latter part of the spring, we've made considerable inroads towards redirecting those calls back to the troops where they are best equipped to answer those questions. We continue to look at that issue. I formed several advisory groups. One is an in-house group of subject matter experts, including dispatchers and desk troopers and desk sergeants, as well as some of the senior management from the troops and headquarters. Also a steering group made up of management, and then a group whose focus is larger but includes members of both COST and CCM who had considerable concern about the troops in dispatching as well. We are finishing some final plans that I look forward to coming back and discussing with you in the near future for some additional improvements when it comes to consolidated dispatch.
So the process is working out pretty well the way it is right now?
It's substantially improved. We still have some additional progress to make, and we're close to accomplishing that.
Thank you. I do appreciate your listening to the concerns when you were here and taking such quick action to come to some sort of a resolution where it could work a lot better than it was originally planned as to how it would work. So I thank you for your work on that. The other question has to do with staffing levels. There was some concern about staffing levels in the past and the lengthy time it takes to train new recruits and actually put them on the road where they belong. And I wanted to get your comments on that. Where are we with staffing levels, and if there are still a number of openings that have yet to be filled, what is that doing to your overtime budget?
All good questions. The department in its entirety has 1,733 positions. 1,201 are dedicated to sworn personnel within the division of the Connecticut State Police. At present, there are 81 vacancies, and in addition to that, there are 128 individuals who are unavailable, many of them because they are now just completing their OJT, which is the last leg, as you referenced, of what is a very comprehensive and also fairly lengthy pre-service training program. And so as the OJT is completed, which is in the next week or so, we will have 58 of the graduates then deployed to the field as well. As you point out, when either you have positions that are vacant or the posts that the persons who were hired into positions are not yet available because of training or other reasons to go to those posts, then you have situations where we would encounter overtime. And so the goal is to keep pace with attrition, which is an average of 4.5 troopers a month that either retire or resign. I'll just pause to add that the caliber of the workforce is really exceptional, and so you have the turnover that we tend to have is attributed to retirements only and not to ordinary resignations. People make a commitment to the state police, and they stay the 20 years and frequently well past the 20 years. Having said that, one of the pieces of information that we keep an eye on, because so many troopers stay longer than the 20 years needed to retire, we currently have 230 individuals who could retire but have not yet. And in this year, we have an additional 50 that will join that group. And so keeping up with the actual number that attrit out, but being mindful that for any number of circumstances that could change by a considerable number is something that we always continue to keep an eye on.
Thank you. That always seemed to be a problem at the local level as well, because the local police have an agreement with the state to send their, I believe, their new recruits to the similar training, which takes about, I believe, 6 months. Is that generally what it takes to train a new recruit?
Well, on the state police side, there is a 26-week academy. It's a residential experience, and then that's followed by 10 weeks of on-the-job training in the field, but under the supervision of a more tenured officer.
Thank you. And one final question: I was watching a program on television the other night where there is going to be a lot more use or consideration being given to the use of body cameras. Is that something that your department is currently considering? And if so, what kinds of problems and expenses are we looking at?
Thank you. Yes, we are exploring body cameras. Just to give a little bit of background, all of the troopers who are on the road, their patrol cars are equipped with a camera, and then the trooper wears on their person a microphone. So there's already a record that's being created and retained with respect to the state police. One of our responsibilities is to provide either resident troopers or supervision of constables in a number of communities in the state, and two of our resident trooper communities have purchased body cameras, and so as to make sure that we meet all of their needs, we are in the final stages of developing a policy now which will guide the practice of body cameras in those communities. Because in my current capacity, I also serve as a honorary member of the Post Council. The Post Council had voted at its last meeting to put together a work group to develop a model policy for body cameras as well. There is limited use of it in Connecticut at this point in time, but quite a bit of variety in the practices that are currently in place. And so both with state police and through the Post Council, looking to get out on the front side of this to make the highest best use of this technology is what we both are committed to do.
With the current process where you have cameras in the car, you're able to capture the car, the license plate on camera. And the officer basically can only capture the audio, from what I understand, correct?
On their person. Yeah.
So there's no really face recognition on the tape itself, on the camera.
Well, it depends. If the trooper is in the car, and for example, if the trooper is transporting a prisoner, you can turn the camera around so it can record inside of the vehicle. Similarly, as soon as the trooper steps out of the car and is interacting with one or more members of the public, then that would be captured by the camera.
Are you looking at policy regarding the use of when these things could go on and off when it comes to facial recognition? Because now you're potentially every stop the camera would be on, and you've got all of this data that is being collected on individuals with face recognition as part of the data.
Well, that's certain. I'm sorry.
And as an attorney, or having been to law school, that raises a lot of potential issues. Is that something you're looking at as well?
Yeah, certainly when you come to drafting policy for body cameras, because you're out of the car and you're interacting with individuals frequently in very sensitive circumstances, and confidential information is being exchanged. Privacy rights are protected, making sure that all the persons.
Thank you very much. Other questions from committee members? Senator Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, good morning.
Good morning.
I want to thank you for meeting with myself and Senator Fasano yesterday. And I appreciated the dialogue. Senator Fasano was quite thorough and has a nice booklet here on your experiences and resume. And then I actually took it home last night, and I think I went through all my daughter's little Post-it notes with a ton of notes that I want to talk to you about. I really would like to have you on record to talk about your experience in New York at the Department of Corrections. I almost want to fast forward to the end where the chairman says, is there anything embarrassing in your past? Because I think this is it. When you look at this report from the Federal Department of Justice, talks about incredible happenings that took place on Rikers Island while under your watch. The amount of violence that took place, the amount of lack of training that took place, the lack of reporting. I have incredible notes from this article, as well as a New York Times article that I like to reference as well. But first thing I'd like to ask you about, yesterday in speaking to us, you said that, and I can only imagine how bad a place Rikers Island is, and I'm sure it's extremely difficult for everyone involved. But I think I told you my wife went to graduate school in New York City and actually spent some time there, and she described it as well, but as a psychologist, and not as an inmate. That was a joke. But basically, you were the head or chief of the Department of Corrections. Is that true, or for the city? Can you just explain your role at that time?
I was the commissioner of the New York City Department of Correction. Okay.
So, and I understand that you mentioned yesterday how much violence takes place in that facility, and I guess there's 9 or 10 facilities that are among this group. And one of your comments was that the violence could have been worse if not for me. I don't know if that's a good enough explanation, and I think I told you that yesterday. It talks about, in this report, extraordinary frequency of violence. The adolescents are at constant risk of physical harm while incarcerated. The number of injuries sustained by adolescents is staggering. For instance, during the period of April 2012 through April 2013, adolescents sustained a total of 754 visible injuries, according to DOHMH. I don't know what that is. But then it talks about how a climate of fear exists, that DOC officials have been well aware of the frequency and severity of staff use of force against adolescents, the high incidence of inmate-on-inmate fights, and number of serious injuries sustained by adolescents, but have failed to take reasonable steps to ensure adolescent safety. Anytime you want to jump in, I'll gladly let you. As discussed later in this report, DOC fails to conduct rigorous and timely investigations, use of force incidents, and does not consistently hold staff accountable for their conduct. As a result, culture of excessive force persists, where correction officers physically abuse adolescent inmates with the expectation they will face little or no consequences for their unlawful conduct.
All right, so let me jump in before you go too much further. I'm very proud of my service during the time in New York City. It was and continues to be one of the most challenging places to serve in the country. It is the second largest jail system in the United States. It has over 80,000 admissions and releases in the course of the year, and an average daily population greater than 12,000. The department has struggled for a number of decades, and it has been under continuous federal oversight for all of that time. I took on that work because I have a reputation for systems reform and for innovation. And I knew how difficult it would be. I also knew how important the work was and continues to be today. During my tenure of about 4.5 years, I did a number of things. The areas where I focused were the populations that experienced the difficulties that you described, the adolescent population, which in New York State is that age group 16 to 18. In addition to that, I focused on the mentally ill, although as you and Senator Fasano had discussed, thank you, I had discussed yesterday, you said DOHMH and you weren't sure what it was. That's the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene, the agency that's responsible for both medical and mental health care I took on a number of those activities because they needed to get done, although they were outside of the scope of my work. I also focused on preparing the regular population for release back to the community because there was such a revolving door of inmates coming back over and over and over again to the Department of Correction. And last, and every bit as importantly, was to focus on staff accountability. And that ran the gamut from the front end, from training, of which there was a considerable amount and significant improvement during my tenure, through enhanced investigative practices, and an increase in oversight within the facilities, the increase by 70% of cameras in housing units and other areas where inmates traveled, particularly corridors and stairwells, and also the requirement that those cameras be reviewed on a daily basis. During my tenure, we put a number of practices in place where the identification of force on camera was sufficient in and of itself to put an employee on immediate suspension. During my tenure, we referred more of the staff, more of the correction officers, to the Department of Investigation, which is the separate city agency that that investigates wrongdoing that goes beyond violations of policy. And as a result of those referrals to the Department of Investigation, also made referrals to the Bronx District Attorney, Rikers Island, which is where the majority of the jails in New York City are located. 10 of the 14 is actually part of the Bronx, which is why they get referred to the Bronx District Attorney.
Those investigations, are they, is that the ID investigations? Is that what you're referring to, or am I correct?
Well, no, within the department, there's a division of investigations, but in addition to that, there's a freestanding city agency called the Department of Investigation.
So what's ID investigations? Is that your department, like internal?
That's correct.
Okay. So in this report, it says, although ID investigations are conducted by trained investigators and superficially more thorough than facility investigations, they nonetheless are plagued by the same biases as the facility investigations, which affect the entire investigative process. Despite lengthy investigations, ID investigators frequently fail to reconcile contradictory statements to reports. So that's your own people making those investigations, correct?
Well, I disagree with the characterization. Let me tell you about what we did during the time that I was there. There was terrific professionalization of that division. The majority of those positions had been held by uniformed personnel. There was aggressive recruitment of professionals, civilians, many of them attorneys. Additional training was provided to them. There were a number of other important measures that were put into place at that time. The requirement that they receive additional medical information, either from the health care provider, and where there was concerns about misconduct, to also secure additional feedback from the medical examiner. There was a system of reviews that were put into place. Individuals at my direction who had been involved with 2 or more uses of force that resulted in discipline, we went back 10 years through the records, identified all of those individuals, and continued to keep them under close watch. We also enforced a longstanding policy that had not been rigorously followed, and that was to continue to review whenever any employee had utilized 3 or more uses of force, and to address those with the employee and to create a written record. So in my view, we developed a strong continuum that went from improvements at the beginning through training and ongoing training, having cameras and things of that sort, and then as necessary to launch investigations and to make referrals.
in addition to the lack of inadequate investigation in this report, it also talks about the timeliness of these investigations, and that's why I'm glad you said that last answer, because it says that 11% of ID cases had been opened for more than 350 days, and 42% of ID cases had been opened between 150 and 350 days. So, it seems though that the investigation was inadequate, and then when they were being handled, they were taking quite longer than what was supposed to happen within 5-month period. So, is that true? I mean, the reporting that you talk about in your answer, was it A, thorough, and then B, timely, according to this report?
So not all investigations are the same. First, when I arrived, there was a significant backlog, and so with the new head of the investigative division, a person, by the way, who had headed a comparable office for the police department for a number of years and quite successfully, we both look through the old cases to see what needed to be pushed to the top of the list, and at the same time put new systems in place for incoming cases. One of the innovations that I mentioned to you and to the senator yesterday is that we created a case review process. The general counsel, the chief of department, which is the senior ranking uniform person, and the deputy commissioner over ID met on a biweekly basis and continued to review cases and to make sure that the most critical ones were receiving the amount of attention needed to move them along. And all the while, we continued to increase the funding for bringing in additional investigators. And during my tenure, first brought in 7 and then an additional 22.
And when those investigations came to a result of inappropriate behavior, let's say, or certainly violence and other questions, was discipline part of the result? Because it also talks about inadequate staff discipline that took place from the department. So, you know, how did can you explain that to me? I mean, how, you know, this is not something that I'm making up. This is in a report by the federal government.
I understand.
And you know, I encourage everyone to take a look at it. But there's also, and you know, I don't want to take up the entire time of the committee, but they talk about lack of training for those individuals who work with the adolescents. They talk about a top management has failed to meaningfully address an organizational culture that tolerates unnecessary and excessive force. Then, if you just go to the New York Times article, this is where I'll ask my last.
Sure. Do you want to go back to some of those things? Or?
Well, I don't know. You know, because
I think they're. I mean,
you're
they're
more than welcome to defend as whatever you can, of course. But this is I don't know. This is really bad. I read it last night and I was just flabbergasted by it. But go ahead.
Okay.
Feel free.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned a couple of things there. So about the adolescents, let's start there. The initiative that we undertook was comprehensive, and it started within a short amount of time of my arrival. We looked to make the highest best use of the physical plant, putting the adolescents in the housing most appropriate for that population. We significantly increased staffing, both uniform and civilian. They received additional adolescent-specific training prior to their assignment. In addition to increasing the uniform staffing, we established a deputy warden to oversee the adolescent portion of the jail. We brought in an ombudsman with a strong background in juvenile justice. We added an integrity control officer, which is a direct report to the investigation division. We added a significant number of cameras. Those were in the housing units, as well as the corridors and stairwells. We expanded the school program with the cooperation of the Department of Education so that it ran not just through the regular academic year, but through the summer as well. In addition to that, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we are the first social impact bond funded initiative in the United States with the $9.7 million that we were able to attract through that initiative. We put into place a after-school cognitive development program so as to assist the adolescents in their problem solving and decision making, because as you had mentioned earlier in your comments, as much of the difficulty was between inmate to inmate instances as it was between staff and the population. And those programs were provided by community-based providers, so those were more adults from the community having interaction with the adolescents as well. We eliminated a well-intended but not well-designed program for adolescents who had behavioral problems but also mental health issues. So we eliminated. It's referred to there as the Maui. It doesn't matter, but it was removed. We put into place various kinds of sentencing strategies so as to reduce the amount of time that individuals were assigned to punitive SEG and then had conditional discharge opportunities so as to bring them back into general population as quickly as possible.
You spoke about the cameras, and I can't find the page right now, but they spoke of these rooms at what it was maybe called a free cell or something like that, where almost as if they were free to act any way they wanted because there was no camera involved.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we increased cameras by over 2,000 in number and continued to install them throughout my tenure. I think the effectiveness of the cameras and the certainty with which the videos were reviewed speaks to their efficacy, because where we had not yet installed cameras is where officers who were bent on violating policy and indeed violating the law there's an instance or two that are mentioned, and that's exactly where they took those individuals.
How accurate do you? And I don't know how many articles have been written, but I do have one by the New York Times. How accurate do you feel their portrayal was of this situation?
I think they got quite a bit right. I think there are some errors that were made, and I'm sure they were not intentional.
The reason I ask you that is because in this article it says that the commissioner at the time, Dora B. Schriro, did not. Well, let me take a step back. It talks about the two wardens of the facility, which were providing reports. And yesterday you said you're a data person. Yesterday, in this article, it says they were providing reports that violence was down. But in the article, it says the data's wrong. So, A, if you're a data person, how could you accept that type of data when it's untrue? And then B, if the two people who were providing these reports, it speaks about how they should have been demoted, and you did not only not demote them, but promoted them. Is that true in the article? Am I reading it correctly?
You read it correctly, but parts of it are incorrect.
Okay.
So I spent quite a bit of time in that jail, walking the halls and serving in the school area, and being there as we introduced the various programs. And it was my impression and the impression of many others that the overall tenor of the facility had improved, and so there was no obvious indicator that the data was incorrect. Now, I did not promote either of those individuals after the fact. What I described to you and Senator Fasano yesterday is the warden who had been there and and during his watch had provided data that was incorrect. And this is data for the rest concerning inmate-on-inmate fights. The information that had been submitted became a part of the record. When that warden was promoted and the new warden was there a short amount of time.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to interrupt.
No. That's fine. Sure. I will certainly yield my time, and if there are others that need to speak, and I can come back. Great. Thank you.
Senator Duff.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for yielding for a moment. I've got to run out for a quick meeting. The Commissioner and I have had an opportunity to discuss her time here in Connecticut, and I certainly appreciate your comments that you made. And, Commissioner, I wanted to certainly just lend my support before I walk out of the room, and you may be finished with your testimony before I get back. So I just want to take a moment to at least say that I understand the concerns that have been raised this morning. However, in my opinion, you have been in the job now for long enough time for us to at least weigh the work you have done. Over that time, I think it's probably been over a year now,
a little bit,
correct?
Yes.
And I think in that amount of time, as we've talked about at our meeting, you've managed to bring in a number of different constituencies, been able to work smoothly in a manner that has brought, I think, a lot of various agencies and again various groups of people to work in a way that hadn't been seen in a while. And because of that, I think we've all been very impressed with your work ethic and the way in which you handle things. I don't know of your past in New York other than what I've read and obviously what has been raised today. And I certainly respect everybody's ability to ask questions about that and for you to respond to that. But for me anyway, I think your track record here in Connecticut has been a good one. I see that you have a lot of support from the various groups of folks that you work with on a day in and day out basis, and for that, you will certainly have my support going forward in this committee and out in the legislature. So again, thank you to Senator Kane for yielding. I appreciate that, and for the other members as well. Thank you.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Can I go to Representative Dargan?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I know on a daily basis I get the opportunity to meet with the Commissioner. I'm a little worried about Senator Kane, though. I think that he might be looking for the working families endorsement next time with a strong initiative towards labor, and that's what my question is. In these incidents, a lot of times, whether it's in your previous experience in New York or here, there's a lot of conflicts when it comes to labor management. In the years that I've been up here dealing with a number of commissioners, you've been in this position now for a year, and that period between labor and management still seems to be respected. And I say that in a positive manner because having the opportunity to meet with the state police unions and in your position collectively in a collaborative effort to try to understand what those concerns are, whether it's dealing with regional dispatch or within our troops, some of the issues that the unions have put forth not only to us as a legislature, but to you, it's been very positive. So to that, I'm very happy with the past years and the response that you've given not only to the administration, but to the rank and file and union members. And I think that's important. Senator Kane did raise some good points, in New York, but I think from a collective standpoint, we're better as an agency when we listen to all sides of that issue, whatever that issue is. So for that, I say thank you for the work that you've given to the state.
Thank you. And if I could just mention I talked about the workforce specific to state police before, and I clearly cannot say enough positive for their professionalism and their bravery. But those qualities really transcend all of the 6 divisions, and it's been really such a pleasure to take the 6 divisions and to look at the strengths that all of them bring to the table, and the initiatives, the ones that we've accomplished in this last year. I think we've gone so far so fast because it's been all of the 6 divisions coming together as one agency, and so many of the bargaining units as well, and the reputation that I've developed and the relationships that I've developed with MP9, I'm very proud of, and I'm also very proud to say that I share comparable relationships with the other groups as well.
I'm Senator Larson.
Yes, I know. Are you a member of this committee now?
I'm a
We'll
ex
go ahead.
officio.
Okay, go ahead.
Commissioner,
That's right. You are. Go ahead.
Thank you, Representative. Commissioner, thank you very much. I haven't had the opportunity to meet with you. I apologize. I missed that opportunity the other day, but thank you for your service. Just have a couple of questions in general about emergency planning and so forth. We're gone through our 5th snowstorm, and I was able to get my TV service back up in time to watch the UConn women's game last night. Thank God for my provider. Just briefly, if you could describe, we have a difficult budget coming forward. Where might you see some cost efficiencies without jeopardizing public safety in your division? Particularly around the topic of emergency management, et cetera. I just wonder if you may want to make a comment on that.
In general, the state of emergency preparedness in Connecticut is quite strong, and I'm very proud of the work that the division, working with the other divisions, have accomplished. That division is both small and mighty. The number of staff is not very large, but the work that they do and the partnerships that they have developed throughout the 5 regions really have yielded some remarkable results. We continue through the DEMIS division of DES to continue to develop their skill sets and to share those skill sets with the 5 divisions. We're all well acquainted with the annual emergency drills that we do both weekends and during the week, and the kinds of critiques that happen after the fact. I'm also very, very pleased to announce, it may be the first time to talk about it publicly, that the division has sought national accreditation for preparedness, and we went through that examination process in the last several months. And although they won't officially vote till this coming April, every indication is that we will be among the very few that will actually be accredited the first time up at bat. And that speaks again to the caliber of the exceptional people that the state of Connecticut employs.
Thank you very much, Representative. Just one more additive to that. I'm a big fan of technology, and I know that in my real job, I'm the executive director of the Tweed New Haven Airport Authority. So, we play an integral role in a lot of safety issues along the coastline and so forth, and in that particular arena of airports and so forth. And we're highly regulated by the FAA, so we have an awful lot of those conditions and so forth. But we use a great deal of technology to help solve a lot of our maintenance type issues and recording issues and so forth. And I'm just would be mindful to you that as we go into this budget cycle, if there are opportunities to improve the technology in your divisions, it would be I think a great opportunity. We have an awful lot of resources available to us. One of my constituents is the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technologies in East Hartford, and they're continually looking to ways to improve on a technology plane opportunities for cost savings. So you may want to just keep an eye and a tilt towards that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's an area where I see that we can apply to all of the 6 divisions, and I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Larson. I almost said Representative Larson.
That's fine. Just don't call me late to dinner.
Thank you. Representative Buck Taylor.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
Listening to Senator Kane, noting that the date of the report was in 2014 and that most of their concerns had to do with adolescents, and that you had 10 years in New York as commissioner and your expertise, I guess, is system reform and innovation. Is it your position that New York was so bad before you got there that even with the time that you spent there, that type of a report would be issued subsequent to your leaving that job?
A correction, please. I was there for about 4.5 years, not 10 years.
Actually, I thought you said 10 years, but actually 2009 to 2014, I think, is on your resume.
Yeah, I came in in the fall of 2009 and left January of 2014 because I began here in January of 2014.
Okay, so, thank you for making that correction. But is it your position that that report is so negative because of the situation with the New York correctional system prior to your getting there, so that there's no way you could have made substantial improvements in your tenure there?
No. What I'm saying is it is a very difficult place, and it has been for quite a period of time. I was pleased to have brought a number of reforms and innovations, and I believe that with additional time they would have yielded stronger and stronger results. It's clear that things did not turn around as quickly as I would have liked, but that is not for want of effort or skill.
How would you compare the Connecticut correctional system to the New York correctional system?
You know, I'm not particularly conversant with Connecticut, so I don't feel that I could answer that for you.
Okay. You talked about the fact that the timeline for completions was long, and that had to do with the backlog that you were faced with when you began in your position.
Specific to investigations?
Yeah.
Okay.
And how did that improve over the time frame that you were there? Are there statistics that say they were 300 days or 150 days when I got there, and now they were only 60 or 75 days when I left my tenure?
Yeah, the deputy commissioner kept quite a bit of information and tracked it. I don't have specifics to give you. I know that the backlog continued to reduce. It was not eliminated. And I know that with the prioritization of cases, the important cases move forward as quickly as possible.
Senator Kane talked about the fact that you were a data person, and I guess you had told him that when you met with him. Are there any statistics that you have knowledge of that showed that there was a significant change in how poorly or how ineptly something was done when you got there and how it had improved by the time that you left? Was there any, let me look at it and I'm happy with the A+, with the D-? Where did you end up, if you know?
Well, I'm never happy with anything less than 100%. It's my nature to have those kinds of high standards. Depending on some of the different issues, I can tell you, but I don't have the specific numbers, that any incidents involving uses of force with serious injuries improved. That reduced. Uses of force overall increased, and I attribute that in part to the heavy emphasis that I placed on introducing chemical agents as an alternative to physical contact between an officer and an inmate. So those are two examples.
You said that you're not satisfied if you're not doing a really, really good job. How would you grade your performance in New York?
Well, certainly an A for effort. And as for the rest, I'll let the record speak for itself. And
the record being the report from the federal government, or the record being something else?
No, I mean the sum total of my work.
Are you, and have you, decided to do anything differently here than you were doing over in New York to either address any of the concerns that have been expressed or ways that you yourself think that you could improve upon?
Yeah. There are two very different sets of circumstances, but certainly one of the things that has worked exceptionally well here is the continuous outreach that I have with others, not only within the organization, but within the whole of Connecticut. And so to be both visible and verbal, communicative with all of the stakeholders, and has been exceptionally successful here. And so you can continue to count on me to be outgoing and a good listener and a great communicator in all the things that I do.
Are you finding the job in Connecticut, in the position that you're in now as commissioner, corrections in New York and corrections in general is a whole different animal, or somewhat of a different animal than what you are doing now? Are there things in place here that is going to make your job more productive in with quicker turnarounds as to what you want to see accomplished?
They are different, and in addition to that, we have been exceptionally productive and very successful in a number of areas. For example, in just the first year, and taking advantage of a bill that the legislature passed that made it possible for first responders to utilize Narcan, we trained all of our troopers from the colonel on down, so all 1,201, and equipped them with Narcan. And within the first week of having completed that initiative, we had a trooper involved in the first save, having dispensed the Narcan. At this point in time, it's less than 3 months later, and as a result of regular calls for service, our troopers have now saved 13 members of the state of Connecticut by coming on the scene of individuals who had overdosed on opiates and were in extreme distress. Another of the things that we started to coincide with Domestic Violence Month, which is in October of every year, is we volunteered to sign up and train all of our troopers to administer the lethality risk assessment, which is the evidence-based instrument that's used to identify domestic violence victims who are at heightened risk of injury or worse. And so all of our troopers have been utilizing the LAP on DV calls over the last several months. And a little bit harder to measure success with that, but we're working with Karen Jarmak and her team so as to drill down on the information that we're collecting there. And as I mentioned in my remarks, I think there's more that we can do, both with the number of individuals who are utilizing heroin, engaged in heroin trafficking, but also succumbing to all the bad that can befall it, as well as making further inroads in the area of domestic violence. With all of the natural disasters that we've had in this first full year, and we've had quite an assortment up to and including earthquakes just a month or so ago before the snow started, we've stepped up and developed easy-to-use checklists so that local emergency managers and just folks in small businesses and homes and schools can feel more confident about their ability to rise to those occasions and meet those situations. When the threat of Ebola came to states even as small as Connecticut, we rose to the occasion again. It was quite striking. Neither in the law enforcement field nor in the medical field, including the CDC, did they have express protocols for first responders. And what, of course, we want is for every firefighter and every police officer and every state trooper to run to a call for service without hesitation. But we want to do everything we can to protect them and their families as well. And so working with state and federal and local authorities in developing strategies for them to implement into their response protocols is another of the things that we've done in this first year. We talked a little bit earlier before you had an opportunity to join us about the work that's gone on in consolidated dispatch and some additional steps that will be taken there as well. And as I've come to fully appreciate in this year, the state troopers have a really unique responsibility, and so they have some extraordinary opportunities as well, because for 81 of our 169 communities, they are the local police, whether they're there as a resident trooper or the only responder, as well as patrolling the roads statewide. And so one of the other areas that we're looking at, and it's a blending again, Demis is involved in a number of things, including through grants